What I'd like to do is screenshot a poem that some of you might not know. It's in ModPo Plus. It's a great poem. So you might be seeing it for the first time. So here comes. It's Fred Waugh, Between You and Me, There Is an I. And apologies. What I'd like to do is ask Davey, Jess, and Kamara to be the first to comment briefly about anything here. Between you and me, there is an I. Between two stools, the hyphen lies. The eggs in the nest, the blind in the fold, the hinge of the city, the door and the jam, the map and its edges, the wars I've not fought, the life and its lease, the rope but which end, the brink and disaster, the bank and the laughter, the spike below Chinaman's Peak, that spot where two rails meet. From between two stools, hear the silence rise, the smoke round your neck, the tongue and the dash, the cat and the cradle, the dog dead in the creek, the slash and the burn, the shadows of NAFTA, the head and the tax, rock bluff and river, the laundry its mark, the height and the trestle, kata and strophe, not caboose, but what's after. And I will ask someone to put a link to that into our chat so we can see the text, because now you don't see the text and you're wondering what the heck you're going to say. Little bio note. Davey, would you be first, by the way? Little bio note. Fred is from the middle of Western Canada in a rural spot that was populated by families from China who were brought in essentially as slave labor to make sure that the Trans-Canadian Railroad was built. There's a reference to that in this poem, marvelous poem. Fred then has taught many places and moved west. He's now really a Vancouverite. And he thinks a lot about the Chinese exclusion laws, connected with the poets of our course through the so-called New American Poets at the Vancouver Poetry Conference of 1963, where he met Creeley and Ginsberg and Spicer and a lot of other people. And Fred was, I'll just add, the essentially the Poet Laureate of Canada. I'm not sure what it's called, something like that. So he's a really, really important figure. And this poem is just amazing. So Davey, just one thing, and then Jess and Kamara will follow.
I'm going to do that ModPo thing where I just hang out with one line. And I think with your framing, Al, I'm going to hang out with the line, that spot where the two rails meet, which is encouraging us to think about the joining of, in this case, the Canadian Transcontinental Railroad. And Al, as you were saying, the labor that produced it. And I think that the thinking that line facilitates presents a pretty good model for reading and unpacking and sitting with other lines in this poem, and the way that their two components join one another is to go back to Gabe's comment at the beginning of the webcast, to think about the labor that joined them, both the labor of using language and the labor asked of or forced upon variously in these different usages bodies. And I think that if this is a poem that is thinking about joining and thinking about the kind of joining that poets do, we might think very differently about the Eileen Myles poem, Writing, from week 7, about connecting any two things. And that sort of, Myles is sort of thinking about the work that poets are able to do to create connectivity. And I think that what this poem is asking us to do differently is to think about language as a tool for putting pressure on and making evident the labor embedded in connection.
You did so much more, Davey, as usual, than the line. You really talked about the poem. And all those conjunction ands create the and of you and me, between you and me. And somewhere in that space is the I. And of course, the I is the person, is the speaker, is the subject. And that's what Fred Waugh is trying to figure out. Who am I between these things? So that's really great. Thank you. So Jess and then Kamara on this poem, anything at all, briefly though?
Yeah, I'll also choose one line because I'm still thinking about counter narratives and like the genres of history. And I think both of these poems are engaged in that in different ways. And the line I'm thinking about is the wars I've not fought. And that might make some people think of Stein's The Wars I Have Seen,
Yeah,
right? So, this idea of referring to the wars that you haven't been a part of, at least in that way, you know,
right.
speaks to the way that we remember those events, the kinds of experiences that we value as like creating knowledge about those events. And I think that this, like, you know, is spot on when thinking about Keane and counter narratives and this idea of like, you know, how we form history, or like, you know, what counts as history, right? And like what counts as um, canonical or whatever. It's a similar process. Like that hinges on the forms of knowledge that we value or take seriously as knowledge or whatever. So
Mm.
it's like the ephemeral, did it even happen, you know, passing by thing is sort of a similar order to the like war that I didn't actually fight in or something,
Mm.
you
Mm. That's great. Thank you so much.
know.
Okay, so Kamara, any thought on this poem? And then those of you who are watching comments, you know, Facebook and so forth, get ready to tell us what's going on, and then I'll ask a few folks here to comment on those things. So, Kamara.
Yeah, when I was listening to this poem, I was thinking of a seesaw, and I can't, I was trying to find something else to say, but I can't get this image of the sound of the lines being a seesaw that's just going back and forth and back and forth. I also have the image of like a pendulum swinging back and forth, but I think the seesaw makes more sense to me as an image of some of the sounds of the lines in this poem, because of the, I don't know the physics thing, but the thing that's in the middle of the seesaw that sort of regulates the balance back and forth.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of the lines where like the spike below Chinaman's Peak, or that spot where the two rails meet, is a moment in the poem where the balance of the seesaw shifts to one end, and just like doubles down. And something is heavier, stronger, weighing it down on one end than the other.
That's really great. And we don't have time for this because we got a call coming in, but I hope everybody will consider the really troubling line, the rope, but which end? You know, we've done all these conjunctions and then we get this rope and it's pretty spooky. You know, is it the rope of lynching? Is it the rope of essentially the tug of war that became the spot where the rails met? Does it have something to do with essentially a Chinese chain gang? So, you know, I've had Fred talk about this a little bit.